Hi, and welcome to the Debrief, Carolina Journal's weekly recap of everything in politics, public policy. We're covering it all, everything that's been going on this week. I'm Donna King. I'm editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. Joining us this week, Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation, here with us with all his deep knowledge of everything going on right now. And of course, Teresa Opeka, a reporter for the Carolina Journal covering the legislative branch. And then on the other couch, David Bass is here covering everything from the education perspective. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about the state budget for sure. And David Larson, Carolina Journal's opinion editor. We've had a lot going on this week. One of the big things going on was 3 public hearings into redistricting. Now, they were held in 3 different places across North Carolina, at App State University, in Elizabeth City, down on the coast, and then in Raleigh. Lots of folks from the public got a chance to come up and give their opinion and have their voices heard in this process. Most of them were opposed to the process. We saw a lot of familiar faces from the hearings last time. Others were encouraging lawmakers to take a closer look at the 2021 legislative maps.
We had it for 100 years under Democrats here, but I'm glad to see now that we have Republicans in charge, so many Democrats are against gerrymandering. When I looked at the districts that were written up in November 2021, issued in 2021, I noticed that across the 100 counties in North Carolina, only 9 were split counties. The rest were consolidated districts. Even the maps that the special masters gave us have 11 split counties. I would encourage the legislature, you approved the map in November 21 that you believed accurately reflected North Carolina. The state Supreme Court was unable to provide any specific legal or constitutional error to it. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled not on whether the maps were right, but whether the Supreme Court had a place. The maps were constitutionally and legally properly prepared. If the citizens want special masters, then they need to amend the U.S. Constitution to provide for that. Thank you for your opportunity.
And that was retired Army veteran Richard Spear. He lives in western North Carolina. He was in somewhat of the minority, really, calling for those 2021 maps. The majority of people up there were just denigrating lawmakers and criticizing the process. You know, a lot of them did ask Mitch why we were doing this in a non-census year. Why in 2023?
Court cases.
Sure.
And this is something that North Carolinians have become accustomed to, that over the years, you're supposed to redraw election maps when you have new census data. So the year after the census, which would be the year that ends in the number 1. And generally, you'd expect that that's the only time you're going to draw new election maps. But because of court cases, North Carolina has continued to have to come back and draw maps again and again and again to deal with these court cases and different types of rulings that have come out with the courts. And that's what's happened this time. In 2021, after the 2020 census, lawmakers drew a new congressional map, they drew a new state house and state senate map. All of those maps ended up getting thrown out. What the speaker was saying is, well, now, based on all of the court action, both the federal courts and the state courts have eventually said that either the federal court system and the state court system shouldn't have anything to do with any legal claims of partisan gerrymandering. And so if that's true, why not just go back to the maps you originally drew in 2021 and use those, which is an interesting point. We'll see if lawmakers go along with that.
Sure, sure. Now, this is mostly for these are for the 2024 elections, but we do have elections coming in 2023, municipal elections. There's a new development in the felon voting case. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is interesting because we know that in the last general election, felons who had completed active prison time but haven't finished the rest of their sentence, the parole, probation, post-release supervision, were able to register and vote because of some state court action. In April, the state Supreme Court, and we're going to watch some of the video of their oral arguments in this case, the state Supreme Court decided, no, our state constitution bans felons from voting unless a law has been passed that reestablishes those rights. And so that meant that the State Board of Elections had to go back and tell all of those felons who registered to vote in November, you can't vote anymore. Right. Around the same time that happened, the folks who had been working on this same issue at the federal level decided, well, let's go back to the federal case and see if we can get the felons to be able to vote in the federal case. They asked Judge Loretta Biggs at the U.S. District Court to speed up their case so
Okay.
they could get some action on it. She just decided this week, no, we're not going to expedite this case. You've had several opportunities, plaintiffs, in recent years to try to expedite this case, and you didn't. We're not going to do anything to speed it up. And so the case now goes back on its normal schedule, and a trial in this case is right now scheduled for April of 2024.
All right, we're going to be paying close attention to that. David Larson, tell me you had some thoughts on this.
I think Mitch touched on it a little
Sure.
bit, but it's a point that Dallas Woodhouse, our colleague and
woodshed,
former,
sure.
he brings up, but that the state constitution does lay out, basically it's pretty clear about this, and that if somebody's a felon, it says they do not necessarily have a right to vote legally unless the legislature makes a specific path for that to happen, and the legislature did have a path. So the plaintiffs in the case, I think they're hoping that it's unconstitutional in some way, but it does already have a reference in
Sure.
the Constitution that lays it out pretty clearly that the legislature has a right to limit felon voting in these
Sure.
cases. So.
Till they could at least complete their sentence, which would include restitution, parole, all those other things.
And one of the points of the suit that the defendants have argued is, look, your complaint is with the piece of the state constitution that says felons can't vote.
Sure.
What you're challenging, though, is a law that was last updated in 1973 that made it easier for felons to vote. You're trying to get rid of a law that allows felons to vote.
Right.
If you succeed, then what should happen is no felons could vote, and that's not what you want. You've challenged the wrong thing. They're trying to argue that.
Wow, it gets complicated.
I had another point on the
Sure.
redistricting though. With all of these hearings, a lot of the people coming up tend to sort of prejudge the process in a way. It seems
Sure.
like they're very worked up about it, and they talk about gerrymandering and racial inequality, and they have they pretty heated comments. And I was looking at online just some of the comments about those comments, and somebody was like, is there even a purpose to doing this?
Sure.
And one of the organizers, a lot of the people who come to comment are kind of organized by these
There's a
progressive
group called
groups.
All on the Line that does a lot of that. They make sure
Yes.
that they get people in the right place at the right time to speak to lawmakers and get their information on the record, right?
Exactly, and somebody who had commented said, is there really a purpose to this? It feels like the maps aren't even out there, and the comment from one of the organizers is, well, we need to have all of these comments on the record for future litigation. It's
Sure.
going to be very useful. So that kind of gives a picture of how a lot of people, they're looking at it strategically. It's not necessarily, some people use the term astroturfing.
Sure.
It feels kind of grassroots, people getting up, I'm from this district, here's
Yeah.
how I feel. But there's people that
Oh,
are
yeah.
looking towards future lawsuits and saying,
Right.
here's why we need to do this. It should be on the record for future lawsuits.
Sure. So it's not really organic. It looks like, John Doe's coming up to talk to his lawmakers, but that's not always the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the interesting thing from my perspective with redistricting is everyone's always concerned about gerrymandering if they're the ones not in power.
Sure.
So previous when, Democrats were in control, Republicans were very concerned about
100
it.
years, yeah.
And now we've switched on that. So it is a matter of, partisanship there, of course.
Sure.
I did want to point out real quick, though, the interesting thing coming out of redistricting that a lot of people are going to watch is with our congressional districts, because right now it's split 7-7, 7 Democrats, 7
Right.
Republicans. And there's a lot of discussion about with these new maps, whether Jeff Jackson out in the Charlotte area and Wiley Nickel kind of in the Triangle area
Sure.
are really going to be put at serious risk of losing those seats to Republicans. So those will be definitely the two that a lot of folks are watching, and maybe even Kathy Manning's seat kind of in the Triad area.
Right.
So potentially we could go from a 7-7 split to something that's more like a
Sure.
a 10-4 or something like that potentially. So those are going to be the big issues coming out, and then also,
Right.
of course, the whole matter of if Tim Moore, not going to be speaker anymore, whether
Sure.
he wants to run for a congressional seat, to see how that all kind of falls out. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was strategically they had the congressional redistricting is going to be done first, and then the legislative ones after. Some people say that's to give some of these legislators who are drawing the maps a chance to weigh their, it's kind of a cynical way of looking at it maybe, but so they can, somebody like Speaker Moore could say, okay, do I want to, well, he's already said he's not going
Right.
to rerun, but other legislators, state level, would have a chance to look at these districts and decide, do I want to run before they're.
Sure, sure.
And you touched on
Yeah.
Jeff Jackson. Also, like he's watching. They said rumblings are watching. He might run for attorney general on the Democratic side just to see how these maps come out first before he
Right.
makes an announcement. So
Sure. One of the things I thought was really interesting in some of these arguments is that those who are coming from the left or more Democrat areas or groups are saying that the 7-7 is the goal. That North Carolina's elections are so close that our goal should be, an even split. But we're not. I think one of the interesting things about this is North Carolina, when you look at districts, is very red in some areas and very blue in others. So if you looked across the state, when you look at, for example, a Senate race, it might make sense that there would be a little more split, but the congressional districts are very specific to their area. That's something I think that's gotten lost in this.
Yeah, geography favors Republicans,
Sure.
and that's because Democrats tend to cluster together more. So the districts that are winnable by Democrats are very winnable
Yes.
for Democrats because they cluster together more, whereas Republicans are more spread out. Back when Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton
Right.
in 2016, I think his margin of victory was something like 3 or 4 points, which is not a huge
Sure.
gain, but of the 100 counties, he won something like 75 or 77 of them,
Right.
because Republicans are very well spread out. They can win in closer elections, but win a lot of them,
Right.
whereas the Democrats win fewer elections, but win them with bigger margins. Now, some of that can be done because of the way the districts are drawn, because Republicans would like to have more Democrats in the Democratic districts, but some of it is just geography,
Sure.
the places where people live.
And the criteria which they have to draw by, there's something like the whole county provision and the compactness. There's all of these things, I think, from the Stevenson decision, I believe, which require legislators to try to keep counties whole, to
Right.
not split
And Democrats did
precincts.
that.
Yeah, and so, them, the Democrats being really compacted, as Mitch saying, in the cities, and Republicans being majority in 75 counties. If you have to keep those counties together, Republicans would actually have to almost gerrymander against themselves
Sure.
to get 7-7. They'd have to break a
It
lot
is
of those.
interesting.
And some people would say that's what they did with the maps that the judges forced on them the last time around. They actually drew maps gerrymandered to favor Democrats just to comply with the court.
Sure, sure. It is interesting because in order to get a real 7-7 split, you'd have to have all 14 members on a statewide ballot. That seems like the only way you could really do it, rather than having them represent communities, which is the point of the House of Representatives, why we have a bicameral legislature. This is really interesting. We're going to be watching a lot about this. What were you
And one
gonna
other
add?
brief
Yeah.
note is that as that congressional map is drawn, we can expect that there will be at least some impact from the U.S. Supreme Court's decision not to go along with Alabama's
Right.
congressional map. Alabama wanted to have a congressional map that would have one majority-minority district. The next trial court level said, no, you can't do that. The Supreme Court refused to take up Alabama's case, which shows that even though the courts aren't going to be dealing with partisan gerrymandering, they still are concerned about racial gerrymandering. And some have said that in North Carolina, that means Don Davis's district is probably still going to be very close to what it is now.
Very interesting. So the process should be over, and they are going to be working on this the next month or so?
They'll be working on it for a while, but they can't take too long because filing starts in December.
Okay. All right. We'll be watching that very closely. David, I'm going to come to you actually, because we're still talking about the state budget, still parsing it out. It's not quite law yet. Governor Cooper says he's going to let it become law 10 days after getting it without his signature, because he's got some things in it he doesn't like, among them charter schools. Tell me what the latest is for charter schools in the state budget.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a little bit of a power dynamic back and forth
Sure.
between lawmakers and actually the State Board of Education, which, as it stands right now, there's it's officially nonpartisan, but there are members on there who are appointed by a Democrat
Okay.
and members who are appointed by a Republican. So Democrat appointees control that board. So they had made a move to basically, I should say, the Republican legislature had passed a bill that would basically take power away from before there was a charter advisory committee that advised the state board
Okay.
on applications for new charters. And then the state board itself had the final authority on voting up or down on those charters. So the legislature passed a bill that basically said, no, we're creating a new board that is actually going to have more of the power to on the up or down vote on the charters. Right. The state board really didn't like that. They passed their own policy saying, well, if you do that, we're affirming that we have the right to either vote on funding those charter schools or not. So now in the latest budget, the General Assembly basically said, no, you don't have that authority except in limited circumstances. So all this back and forth has ultimately meant that with the new budget, that it's going to streamline the process for creating new charters, make it a little bit easier. There had been some roadblocks put up previously for some charter schools. So it's good news for charters. There's a huge wait list. A lot of families are waiting to get into charter schools, so there's definitely demand to create new ones, and the budget is going to open the door for
This
that.
has got to be good news for them, for charter
absolutely.
school advocates. What are they saying?
Yeah, no, they're obviously very much in favor of it. I mean, I think it goes in tandem with opportunity scholarship expansion, more families being able to choose a private school. There'll be more access to charter schools now.
Right.
Contrary to the notion that the Republicans are dismantling public education, there's still plenty of funding for public education. Most families are still going to choose a public school.
Sure.
For the other families that want a different option, they'll now have a better pathway for that.
Very interesting. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think there's been, in the school choice kind of world, this budget and this legislative session, there's been a lot of focus on opportunity scholarships, the idea of vouchers, but kind of the idea of charter schools is also still a really big thing that will advance school choice. So I mean, basically, there are public schools, they're funded that way, but they have more of a feel of a private school. So I think that's a good option for a lot of people that are nonprofit in that way. And there's those huge backlogs of people that really want to attend. So if they've had that kind of logjam of opening up new ones, I remember a while back there was a cap at 100, and that cap's been lifted, but then it's still not. They're not all getting approved in a quick way. That this backlog of students who would like to attend one, can. So it's almost they're free. So it's almost like attending a private school in some sense for free. So a lot of people are really attracted to the idea, but hopefully this will open up more of them, make more of them available to people.
Of course. Teresa, what's the governor saying about things like this?
Obviously, he's not happy about it. He, kind of goes back, uses the same talking points he has. Then I see the banner is still up on the website.
Sure.
We're
still in emergency?
We're still in a state of emergency for education across North Carolina. I'm surprised there's no flashing sirens added to that at this point.
Right.
But he's saying the same thing. It's going to continue to hurt education and hurt, the teachers and just in general. It's the same old song, basically.
Right. But there's teacher raises, all that kind of thing in the state budget. Do you think it's falling on deaf ears, or he's still a popular governor?
He is still a popular governor. We just put out a new Civitas poll the John Locke Foundation did that shows he's back above water, which is in stark contrast to Joe Biden, who continues to be about 20 points underwater among North Carolina voters. I do think a lot of these messages are kind of just falling by the wayside because it's the same message and it's not creating any movement. My one takeaway from the story that David Bass was just telling us is if you're the State Board of Education and you're going to defy the General Assembly, wait until they're out of town. Don't do it while they're still working on the budget and can just counteract what you just did.
Sure. All right. So, Teresa, speaking of the budget, one of the things I think is in it might be on a different bill. North Carolina Insurance Commissioner Mike Causey is no longer the fire marshal.
Yeah, as of January 1st, he will no longer be the fire marshal.
Give me the details on this.
Sure. So, and actually, that dual role has been in existence since the 1940s. So it's going way back for this. So yeah, the General Assembly put this inside the budget where they will create an independent office for a fire marshal. The insurance commissioner will still pick that person or will pick that person, but the General Assembly has to approve that appointment. Or they, see what happens there. Mike Causey was none too happy about that. He said he was thankful for the raises they gave state employees, but he wasn't consulted. None of the firefighters associations were consulted, including North Carolina Association of Firefighters. So they were very, very upset about that. Taking a look at a quote that Mike said, he said it's just not a good thing. And he said to me, I talked to him on the phone, that, people are calling him up saying, what's going on? What's happening? He just, then this legislation was slipped into the budget. It was slipped in with the North Carolina, I believe it's the High School Athletic Association,
Right.
where it gave the superintendent of public instruction more authority over
Sure.
that. So that was kind of all.
That was another one that raised a lot
yeah,
of feathers.
yeah.
Of
So it
course.
was all slipped in. He says, well, I guess they're going to have to use a different vehicle to slip in this legislation.
Very
But he was not too happy. Neither was the head of the North Carolina Firefighters Association. And what he's concerned about, I believe it's Tim Bradley, if I'm not mistaken, he said that he's concerned about now also with this bill, they're going to turn over the third-party company that's handling the insurance claims for those who were affected by cancer over to the insurance commission. He said nothing against the insurance commission, but the third-party company already knows how to process these claims in a matter of weeks. So the state government's not going to be able to do that. So there's lots of layers when it comes to
I'm
this.
sure you'll be covering that. I'm looking forward to hearing what
Yes.
you have to say. Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, I think that Mike Causey, do you think his run-ins with the state legislature this year maybe contributed to this? Unrelated to fire marshal, but he likes that role.
Yeah, I would think so. Two main points. One, it shows that Mike Causey and his relationship with the General Assembly, all leadership, all Republicans, is not that good.
Yeah.
And the other is that it's another case of the General Assembly looking for a way to establish more of its power. Mike Causey is elected by the people.
Sure.
The General Assembly can't do anything about who is elected insurance commissioner, but if they have a fire marshal that they have to approve,
Right.
that gives them a little bit more power.
Very interesting. What do you thought? What are your
I was
thoughts?
just saying, reading on Teresa's reporting on this, I thought an interesting part of it was Causey. His theory was that he crossed the legislature on a Blue Cross Blue Shield
Sure.
deal, and that's his thinking was they're just mad at me that I didn't go along with deregulating. As an insurance commissioner, he was worried that if you deregulate Blue Cross Blue Shield, it could have some negative drawbacks. I guess they had created a holding company, and they were going to
Sure.
be putting their reserve funds into that holding company, and he thought that was not quite right, because if reserves get too high, you're supposed to redistribute them to the people who are paying their premiums. And so he thought that because he talked about that and didn't go along with them, that
This was the
they're
political
punishing him.
price.
So
Yeah.
that just, maybe it's another example of Speaker Moore playing hardball, like he
Sure.
did Terrence Everett being sent to the basement last
Right.
week.
Oh, I love those pictures. He's
Representative
handing out
Everett.
donuts.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
So he crossed Moore and got, so maybe Moore playing hardball, but I don't know if Mike Causey had evidence of that, maybe
Sure.
just his instinct.
Very
Maybe this is a
interesting.
good place to
Uh-huh.
throw in. I
Yeah.
mentioned earlier the new Civitas poll that just came out today. One of its other questions was, do you think it's time to put in term limits for legislative leaders?
Right.
And we know that we have a Senate leader who is serving his 13th year in that job and a House Speaker who's serving his record 9th year in his job. The Civitas poll asked, do you think it's time for term limits for legislative leaders? 85% of people said yes. Only 5% said no. And when asked about the proper number of terms, the most popular answer, 47%, was just 2 terms.
Oh,
No
interesting.
more than 4 years. There are 9% of people who think that no one should serve as the top Senate or House leader for more than 1 term.
Wow.
So it's very
You
interesting.
know what? There's a learning curve to this. They are skilled legislators, and it feels like 1 or 2 isn't really enough to really get your head around such a big job.
And there were 18% of people who said maybe 3 terms and 19% who said 4 terms, and that was the longest option that we gave. Both Tim Moore and Phil Berger are beyond that
Sure.
4-term limit that we put on the question.
Very
What do they
interesting.
say, though? The way to do that is to vote. You
Right.
vote them out. I mean, that's your term limits.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Mike Causey, just to end the
Sure.
the story, he said he's hopeful that they can correct this in technical corrections and go back
Okay.
and really hear him out and hear the viewpoints of the Firefighters Association, volunteer firefighters across the state. So we'll see what
right.
happens with that.
Sure. Well, we've been paying attention. David Larson, let's shift over to you. This budget that we've been talking a lot about had, a lot of people upset on the left, particularly didn't like some of the things in it. But really, even within the Democratic Party, there was some fighting because it was passed
Yeah.
with bipartisan support. There were a lot of House members that got on board because there was some good funding for good projects and water and sewer and lots of things that the state needs.
Yeah, so Governor Cooper, he didn't veto it. The Medicaid expansion
Sure.
was in there. I think he didn't want to be on the record vetoing that.
Sure.
And then some Democrats went even further. As you said, there was 5 in the Senate. It was completely party
Right.
line. but in the House, 5 House Democrats voted for it.
Okay.
And so there was some progressives that were upset about that, and a few of them put together a letter to call out those 5. So there's the Young Democrats of North Carolina, the Teen Democrats, and the College Democrats of North Carolina. So they put together this letter. And,
Do they really need 3 groups?
No,
by
no.
the way?
How about the
Exactly.
adolescent groups?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So they called out those 5, but especially they called out 4 of the 5 because they were Black Democrats, and they said the budget was anti-Black in certain ways. They didn't really show that
I was going to say, how did they think the budget was anti-Black?
So one said something about reproductive rights. Something said because of health care, which, it expanded Medicaid.
Yeah.
I don't know. So it was a little vague on that. The one part that mentioned Black really was bullying Black judges off the court, when that was part of, North Carolina Judicial Standards Commission is not really part of the budget per se, and they're looking into comments by Anita Earls, who's a Supreme Court justice. So a little shaky in their foundation for that, but
a little more homework.
they called out those 4, and then specifically, and then one of them, Cecil Brockman, responded. He didn't appreciate that.
Sure.
And so he wrote back. So there's his statement. It's kind of long, so it doesn't all fit on the screen there, but basically he says, not appreciating his Black credibility being called out. He said, I'm born and raised in this majority Black district, and I'm Black myself, obviously. And he said that he voted for that because he's on the budget committee. He negotiated about it. He got $29 million in the budget that's going to help these. He mentioned 25 different nonprofit groups in his district.
Sure.
And so he finished it by saying, grow up, which is kind of funny because they're these young. He's like, when you're an adult, you have to talk to people you disagree with. So a little shade thrown back at them.
Sure.
But they did mention that the groups that called him out that March is coming sooner than you think, meaning look for primaries. So it kind of calling out the loyalty, but as a white guy, maybe my voice is not that important on this, but just thinking like that using race as kind of a loyalty test like that, I think it strikes a lot of people as a little odd. Just say you have to vote this way because of your race.
Right.
Just maybe not the best look. I mean, they were kind of bullying. Tricia Cotham kind of said when she was disloyal, they push her out. I think that's something maybe Democrats have to be careful about if you're going to just anytime somebody doesn't vote with you, especially if you're going to call them out by their race.
The purity test.
The purity test.
There's a purity test among particularly these groups. But I think one thing that Brockman points out interestingly in this letter is that as an adult, you have to work with people that you don't always agree with, and you have to compromise and come to conclusions in order to get something done. Whereas this group went straight to social media with a statement. That is not how things really do get done. Certainly they're influential, and Twitter and social media is influential in the process, but it's not what happens in the room, and it's not how things get done. Do you think that this is an age issue? Brockman's not that much older than any of these people who are in this group.
Yeah, no, I think that could be part of it. I mean, kind of to David's point as well, this is another chapter in kind of recent history with the North Carolina Democrat Party and Democrats in the legislature, where if anyone goes off, even slightly off on any kind of issue, there's like this ideological purity test, and there's just severe repercussions for that. There's with Roy Cooper primary, saying I'm primarying you, we're going after you, and these representatives are really working to get benefits they're representing their districts, and their districts are moderate districts, so they're more moderate Democrats on this. And the whole question is, for the future of the North Carolina Democrat Party, is there any room for moderates? There used to be a huge swath of moderate Democrats in the party. It seems like that's definitely going away, and this kind of thing just edges even more and more in that direction.
Right.
And with Black voters specifically, school choice is one thing that they're losing. They're kind of straying away from Democrat orthodoxy, purity on that topic, and so if you press too hard, there's a few, Marcus Brandon and Joel Ford and some of these former legislators who that's their life's work, and they're not even fully considering themselves Democrats anymore because they've been hounded so much.
Sure.
on
I
that,
mean,
so.
I guess when you have social media and everything, you have a hammer in social media, everything looks like a nail
Exactly.
to some of these groups.
Cecil Brockman, to me, is emerging as a person who's going to be important for the future of North Carolina's Democratic Party because he's willing to tell them, look, you're getting
Right.
this stuff wrong. At the time when Tricia Cotham switched parties from Democrat to Republican, some people looked at some of the other Democrats who had voted with Republicans on some issues and wondered whether they were going to switch. And Brockman pretty much said, no, I'm a Democrat, I'm going to stay with the Democrat. But at the same time, he said, look, we need to, as Democrats, look at the way that we're treating the people within our party and our coalition and see whether we think we ought to change this to keep people with us. And I think this is just another example where he's calling out the young Democrats who don't really know what they're talking about and are just have been told, oh, this is bad, so they're going to jump on it and say it's bad. And he's saying, look, I'm actually working on this stuff.
Right.
I got, as David said, money for my district. And this is something I would not have gotten if I had just been one of the no votes. And I think that's going to be a lesson that Democrats are really going to have to listen to and see whether they're going to respond or if they're just going to continue to go along with the no crowd.
Sure. All right, well, that's about all the time we have for the debrief this week. Thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe. We'll be coming right back to you each week. Thanks again.